Mark had never been one to seek attention. In fact, he liked blending into the background. As a scientist working on a distant research mission, he was more comfortable with data and numbers than with people. This planet, Zephyros, was supposed to be a place of scientific discovery. The mission was to study its wildlife and atmosphere, but Mark hadn't expected it to be so. Strange. The crew on the Starliner Rhea was a mixed bag of personalities. Some were eager to explore the unknown, while others were there for the glory. Mark kept to himself, doing his research quietly. He'd never been good with crowds, and the thought of speaking to the others made him anxious. It was easier this way, but everything changed that evening. The mess hall was quiet, with the crew scattered across the long table. Mark sat at the far end as usual, hunched over his datapad, reviewing the readings from his last experiment. The low hum of voices, occasional laughter, and clattering of trays filled the air, but it didn't reach him. He had his head down, focused on the screen in front of him, trying to ignore the awkward tension in the room. Then, shadow loomed over him. Mark barely had time to look up before something sharp pressed against his arm. A sudden, searing pain shot through his skin, and before he could react, he heard a voice low, firm, filled with authority. "Mine." The words echoed in his ears, and Mark froze. He looked down at his arm, where he felt the pressure of teeth sinking into his flesh. His heart raced, and his eyes darted to the woman standing before him. She was tall, with skin the color of polished obsidian, and piercing blue eyes that glowed in the dim light of the hall. Her dark hair was braided, back tightly, and her posture was rigid, like a soldier prepared for battle. She wore a suit of armor that made her look even more imposing, decorated with intricate symbols Mark didn't recognize. Her teeth released from his arm, and Mark barely had time to process what had happened before she stepped back, towering over him. The entire room had gone silent. The other crew members stared, wide-eyed mouths agape. Mark's arm throbbed, the pain sharp but not unbearable. He rubbed the spot instinctively, trying to calm himself. But the woman wasn't finished. She crossed her arms and looked around the room, her gaze intense and unblinking. "You heard me," she said. "He's mine." Mark's head spun. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what had just happened. He wasn't sure whether to be angry or confused or scared. The others seemed equally unsure of what to do. Some crew members exchanged nervous glances. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. They all knew who this woman was. Celara. She was one of the few remaining warriors of the Karen, a species known for their strength, dominance, and strict code of honor. The Charon people had been warriors for centuries, respected and feared across the galaxy. Kylara herself was a leader, a fierce protector of her people, and someone who had earned her place through countless battles and victories. No one messed with her, and now she had claimed Mark. The bite had been no accident. It was a declaration. Mark's thoughts raced. He had read about the Quran, of course. He knew their customs, their fierce loyalty, and their brutal ways. He knew that when one of them claimed someone, it wasn't a simple gesture. It was a deep cultural symbol of protection and ownership. But Mark had never expected it to happen to him. Kylara turned her gaze back to Mark. He could feel the weight of her stare. And for a moment, he couldn't speak. "Do you have a problem with that?" she asked, her voice low and unyielding. Mark hesitated. His mouth went dry. He didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, especially not for something like this. But he couldn't just let this go without saying something. I don't understand," Mark stammered, trying to collect himself. "I don't even know you." A low chuckle escaped her lips, but there was no humor in it. She turned and addressed the rest of the room. "You're all witnesses now. He's mine. No one else will sit near him. No one else will touch him." The tension in the room grew thicker. Mark felt his stomach twist. This wasn't how he had expected the mission to go. He hadn't come here to be marked by some alien warrior, to be forced into a claim he didn't understand. He had wanted peace and quiet, a chance to get away from the chaos of Earth. Now, all he could feel was the strange weight of Kylara's claim on him. The other crew members shifted nervously in their seats, unsure of how to react. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable. Others seemed fascinated by the situation. Mark wasn't sure if they were afraid of Kylara, or if they simply didn't want to get involved. Kylara stood tall, unwavering, her gaze never leaving Mark. She seemed unfazed by the silence that filled the room. Mark finally found his voice. But what does this mean for me? He asked, trying to make sense of it all. It means, Kylara said, her voice colder now, that you're under my protection. It means that no one will harm you, no one will take you from me, and it means you belong to me. Mark's mind raced. This belonged to her. He had never asked for this, never wanted it. He was just here to do his job. But Kylara's eyes were fixed on him, and it was clear that her claim was not something that could be easily ignored as she turned to leave. Her words lingered in the air. No one sits near him. Not unless I say so. And with that, she was gone. The mess hall fell into an uneasy silence. Mark could feel the eyes of the crew on him, but no one spoke. Mark sat there, still reeling from what had just happened. What had he gotten himself into? The next few days were strange for Mark. The bite from Kylara still stung, though the pain had faded. It wasn't just the physical ache that lingered. It was the confusion, the uncertainty, the strange sense of being marked by someone he didn't even know. It felt like his world had tilted on its axis, and he wasn't sure how to right it again. Every time he stepped into a room, he could feel the stares. The crew was still hesitant around him, whispering behind his back, their eyes darting to Kylara's empty seat, then back to him. He didn't need to hear their words to know what they were thinking. The bite had changed everything. Mark tried to focus on his work to drown out the feeling of being an outsider. The mission wasn't over, and there was still much to do on Zephyros. But every task felt harder now. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something he couldn't control. Kylara's presence seemed to linger in every corner of the ship, even when she wasn't physically there. Mark could feel the weight of her claim on him. It was as though she was everywhere, a constant reminder that no one could sit near him, no one could speak to him unless she allowed it. It wasn't that Mark disliked her well. He didn't know her well enough to have strong feelings either way, but her actions were overwhelming. He wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, and Kylara had made it clear that she had marked him as hers. That kind of forceful declaration wasn't something Mark could just ignore. It didn't help that no one on the crew seemed willing to talk to him. A few times Mark tried to engage with others. He was met with polite but uncomfortable responses. They wouldn't look him in the eye, wouldn't sit with him during meals. The isolation stung more than he had expected. The mess hall was the hardest place to bear. Every meal was now a reminder of his new reality. He walked in that day, hoping to simply grab a meal and eat in peace, but the room fell silent the moment he stepped inside. The crew members, who had once chatted freely, now huddled together in corners, eyes darting away when they saw him. Mark made his way to the food counter, his footsteps too loud in the silence. He felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him, judging, wondering if they should say something, or if it was better to stay silent. As he grabbed his tray and moved to the farthest corner, the door to the mess hall opened. Mark barely looked up, thinking it was just another member of the crew. But then he froze. Kylara entered. The moment she stepped inside, the tension in the room grew thicker. She walked with purpose, her tall frame drawing every eye in the room. Mark could feel the air change around her, and he looked down, unwilling to meet her gaze. She didn't glance at anyone else. Her eyes found him instantly. As she walked toward him, the crew quickly cleared a path. No one dared to stand in her way. She reached Mark's table and stood there, her gaze steady and unblinking. Mark swallowed, feeling the weight of her presence. Pressing down on him, he had no idea what to say, what to do. She had claimed him as hers, but that didn't mean they were friends or allies, or even comfortable with each other. Kylara tilted her head slightly, then sat across from him without asking. She didn't wait for permission, she simply took her seat as if it was already hers. The others watched in silence, but no one dared to say anything. Mark shifted uncomfortably, unsure if he should speak or not. He took a bite of his food, focusing on the task as if it would somehow help him ignore the awkwardness in the air. Kylara watched him carefully, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said, her voice deep. And commanding Mark looked up briefly, meeting her gaze for a moment before looking back at his food. I prefer quiet," he said softly, unsure of how to respond. Kylara seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. "Quiet is good. But silence has its limits," she said cryptically. The words hung in the air, and Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't sure what she meant, but the weight of her words lingered in his mind. Kylara wasn't here just for casual conversation. She wasn't here because she wanted to be friendly. She was here because of something deeper, something more complex. The room remained silent as Kylara ate her meal, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Mark as if waiting for something. But Mark didn't know what. It wasn't long before someone entered the mess hall, a crew member who, upon seeing Kylara, hesitated, then quickly moved to the other side of the room. The crew had already begun to avoid her. But it wasn't just the alien warrior they were afraid of. It was the fact that she had marked Mark as hers. Mark glanced up briefly, noticing how the crew scattered in her presence. Everyone kept their distance, avoiding him like the plague. No one came near him unless they absolutely had to. And even then, they kept their eyes down, as if to avoid drawing Kylara's attention. "Don't mind them," Kylara said suddenly, as though reading his thoughts. "They fear what they don't understand." Mark nodded, unsure if he should say anything else. He wasn't afraid of Kylara exactly, but her presence was unsettling. She looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "I see you're still confused. You will understand in time." Mark didn't respond, didn't know how. Slame on him was a mystery he couldn't unravel. And every day, it became clearer that his life was no longer his own. Not with her here, not with her marking him as hers. The crew avoided him. Kylara's enemies would soon start to notice his presence. And Mark had a sinking feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Days passed, and the situation didn't get any easier for Mark. If anything, it only got worse. Kylara's claim on him had made the rest of the crew even more uncomfortable. They stayed away from him more than ever. The silence was deafening. The whispers had turned into glances and quick conversations that stopped whenever Mark walked into the room. Mark didn't understand why Kylara had chosen him. Why him? He wasn't strong, wasn't a warrior like her, was just a scientist. And he had never asked for any of this. And yet here he was, stuck with a warrior who had marked him as hers. The bite on his arm had healed, but it left a strange scar. Every time he looked at it, he was reminded of what had happened. It was as though the mark was a permanent reminder that his life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. The worst part was that he couldn't even escape it. Couldn't go to a different part of the ship and avoid the situation. Kylara was always there, watching him, waiting for something he couldn't yet understand. The rest of the crew had all but abandoned him, leaving him alone with his thoughts, his confusion, and his growing frustration. That morning, as he walked to the mess hall, he noticed something different. The usual silence in the hall had a strange edge to it. As he stepped inside, he felt all eyes turn to him again. But this time, there was something else. Fear. The crew seemed more tense than usual. They were whispering even more, exchanging nervous glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Mark felt a sinking feeling in his chest. What was happening now? He walked to his usual spot, trying to ignore the heavy atmosphere. But before he could sit down, a voice called out to him from behind. "Mark, down." He turned to find Lieutenant Claire, a fellow scientist, standing at the entrance. She hesitated before walking over, looking around nervously. Mark raised an eyebrow, surprised to see her approaching. He hadn't spoken to her in days. After Kylara's claim, no one seemed willing to get close to him. "Can we talk?" Claire asked quietly, glancing at Kylara, who was sitting at her usual place. Her gaze was fixed on Mark, but there was no sign of any emotion in her eyes. Mark looked from Claire to Kylara. He knew Kylara wouldn't like this. She was territorial, protective of her claim on him, but he had to know what was going on. Something was happening, something that made everyone afraid. "Sure," Mark said, standing up from the table. and following Claire to the side of the room. The mess hall was quieter than usual, with the crew barely speaking. Their food left half-eaten. Once they were out of earshot, Claire looked at Mark with a mix of concern and hesitation. "I don't know if anyone has told you this, but there are rumors spreading. Some people think Kylora might be using you to settle a power struggle with the Charon. Her species has ... enemies." Mark blinked in confusion. Enemies. "But I thought she was just a warrior." "She is." Claire nodded. "But the Charon are a proud and powerful race. Kylora comes from one of the oldest families. When she marked you, it wasn't just a personal claim. It's a declaration, a statement. Some of her enemies might see you as a threat to her authority." Mark took a step back, his mind racing. He had no idea what to say. Kylora was a warrior, yes, but he had never thought about her position in the galaxy. To him, she had always been just the person who had bitten him, the person who had made a claim on him without asking. But now, hearing Claire's words, Mark realized just how much he didn't know. "So you think Kylora marked me because of politics?" he asked, trying to wrap his mind around it. "I'm not sure," Claire replied, "but that's what the whispers say. Kylora doesn't do things without a reason. She's not here for the mission alone. She's here for something bigger, and you might be caught in the middle." Mark's heart pounded. This was more complicated than he had imagined. He thought this was just about a strange claim from a warrior, but it seemed like he had stepped into a dangerous game that he didn't understand. "I didn't ask for any of this," Mark said, his voice tight. "I don't even know why she chose me." Claire gave him a sympathetic look. "I know. None of this is fair to you, Mark. But right now you need to be careful. You're caught in the middle of something much bigger than you realize. Enemies want to make a move. You're the perfect target. They'll use you to get to her." Mark nodded slowly, his mind spinning. He had always been a person who stayed out of conflict, who avoided trouble at all costs. But now he couldn't run away. Not from Kylora's claim, and not from the danger that seemed to be closing in around him. "I don't know what to do," Mark admitted. "How do I even survive in this mess?" Claire gave him a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach. Her eyes, "I don't have all the answers, but you're not alone. If you need help, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." Mark felt a small flicker of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. He didn't want to face this alone, and now he knew that at least one person on the crew wasn't afraid to talk to him. "I appreciate that, Claire," Mark said quietly. But just as he was about to say more, a sharp voice interrupted him. Mark turned to find Kylora standing a few feet away, her gaze locked on him. She hadn't moved from her seat, but her presence in the room was enough to make everyone go silent. "You're talking too much," she said, her voice low and firm. "Finish your meal and stay where I can see you." Mark's stomach twisted. He knew better than to argue. Kylora wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, and no one crossed her, not even him. He looked back at Claire and nodded. I'll see you later," he said, his voice soft. Claire gave him a sympathetic look, then turned and walked back to her seat. Mark sighed and walked back to his own table, his mind full of the new information. He had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a warrior marking him anymore. This was about survival. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that things were getting worse. Every day, the tension on the ship grew thicker, and the whispers behind his back never stopped. The crew still avoided him, their fear of Kylora hanging in the air like a shadow. It wasn't just the isolation that bothered him anymore, it was the growing sense that something was coming, something dangerous. The reality of Kylora's claim was beginning to sink in. The bite, the words, the way she had taken him as her on-it wasn't just a cultural oddity, it was a warning. Mark had always been a man of logic, someone who liked to figure things out, but this situation was beyond him. He was in the middle of something he didn't understand, and the more he thought about it, the more unsure he became. His days were now filled with unease. He spent most of his time in his quarters, trying to focus on his research, but it was hard to concentrate with the weight of Kylora's claim pressing on him. He couldn't avoid her, and it seemed like she was always watching, waiting for something. She never approached him unless it was necessary, but her presence was always there. hovering just beyond the edge of his thoughts. One evening, Mark found himself sitting alone in the mess hall. The room was quieter than usual, with only a few crew members scattered around. He had hoped for some peace, but the tension in the air made it hard to relax. Every time someone walked past him, they did so quickly, as if afraid of drawing Kylara's attention. He picked at his food, his mind elsewhere, when he felt a familiar presence behind him. Before he could turn around, Kylara's voice reached his ears. "You're not eating?" Mark looked up, startled. She stood there, towering over him, her eyes cold and calculating. She wasn't in her armor today, but her presence was still overwhelming. She wore simple clothing, but it didn't matter. Her strength was clear, even in this more casual state. "I'm eating," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to show weakness, but it was hard with her so close. Just not very hungry. Kylara didn't seem satisfied with his answer. She reached out and grabbed his plate, inspecting the half-eaten food. "This is not enough." "Need to eat," she said, her voice firm. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. "You will eat," she insisted. "You are mine now." "You need strength." Mark stiffened at her words. It wasn't the first time she had said something like that, but it still hit him hard every time. He wasn't used to being treated like this. He wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not by someone like her. "Please don't do that," Mark said quietly. "I'm not a child. I can eat when I want." Kylar's expression didn't change. She didn't seem angry, but there was no warmth in her eyes either. She simply stared at him for a moment before sitting down across from him. "You misunderstand?" she said slowly, as though explaining something to a child. "I am not asking. I am telling you. You need to eat. You are part of my claim now. That means I take care of you." Mark stared at her, his thoughts racing. He hadn't asked for any of this. He didn't want to be taken care of. But somehow, with Kylara sitting there, he felt smaller, less sure of himself. She wasn't asking him to accept her help. She was demanding it. Part of him deep down didn't know how to fight that. "I don't need you to take care of me," he said, more forcefully this time. "I can handle myself." Kylara's eyes softened just a fraction, but the intensity in her gaze remained. "You will learn that you cannot always handle everything alone. The universe is bigger than you think, Mark. There are forces at play that you do not understand. Right now, you are under my protection." Mark wasn't sure how to respond. To that, the idea of protection made him feel strange. He wasn't used to being the one who needed protecting. He'd always been the quiet observer, the one who kept to the sidelines. But now, it felt like the world was pulling him in a direction he didn't want to go. Kylara leaned forward, her voice lowering. "There are others who will try to use you against me. You are the weakest part of my strength, but that will change. I will make sure of it." Mark's stomach churned. He didn't want to be a weapon, a tool in some larger game. He just wanted to do his job, to study the planet, to be left alone. But now, it seemed like his life was tangled in something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. He glanced around the room, noticing the crew members glancing at him from the corners of their eyes. They were afraid, but not just of Kylara. They were afraid of the unknown. They didn't understand her claim. They didn't understand why Mark had been chosen. "I don't want to be part of a game," Mark said quietly. "I just want to be left alone." Kylara's eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable. "You do not get to choose that anymore. You are mine now. That means you fight with me. You survive with me. And if I say you eat, then you eat. It." Mark swallowed, his throat tight. He didn't know how to escape this situation. He didn't know how to make it stop. Kylara stood, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer. "You will learn. In time you will see. But for now, focus on what matters. Survival." As she walked away, Mark was left alone with his thoughts. Kylara's words had sunk in deep, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. There was no turning back now. It was tied to her in a way he didn't understand, and the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. But one thing was clear. Nothing on this mission would ever be the same again. The days were growing longer, and Mark felt the pressure mounting with each passing moment. It had been weeks since Kylara had bitten his arm and claimed him. Though his physical pain had faded, the mental toll was just beginning. He still didn't understand what had driven her to choose him, and he still didn't know what he was supposed to do with this strange bond they shared. The crew was still avoiding him. The tension between them and Kylara had only increased. They had all heard the rumors, the whispers about how Kylara was using Mark for some larger purpose. How her enemies would target him to get to her. Every time Mark walked into a room, it felt like the walls were closing in. He was never truly alone anymore. He had been marked. And that mark had made him a part of something much bigger. The worst part was that no one would tell him what that something was. Mark had always been the kind of person who liked to know the facts, to gather the information and analyze it. But now, no matter how much he studied, he couldn't find any answers. He tried to talk to Kylara, but every conversation felt like he was talking to a wall. She didn't explain herself, didn't give him answers to the questions that gnawed at him. She simply stated things like, "You're mine, and I will protect you," without ever offering any real explanation. One afternoon, Mark found himself alone in the observation deck. The planet Zephoros lay beneath them, a swirl of blues and greens. It should have been a peaceful sight, but today it only reminded him of the chaos swirling around him. He sat by the window, staring out into the vastness of space, trying to quiet his mind. But as usual, Kylara's presence loomed in the background of his thoughts. He could still feel the weight of her claim on him. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, mental, and no matter how hard he tried to push it away, it was always there. The quiet was broken when the door slid open, and Kylara stepped into the room. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over to where Mark sat. Her presence filled the space, and Mark could feel her eyes on him, even though he didn't look up. "Why are you sitting here alone?" she asked, her voice as steady and calm as ever. Mark turned his head slightly to glance at her. "Just thinking about what?" He hesitated, unsure if he should even try to explain. "About everything. About why you marked me, why this is happening." Ilara's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Mark thought she might say something harsh. But instead she sat down beside him, her expression unreadable. "I've told you before," she said slowly. "You belong to me. That is the first truth you need to understand." "You are part of me now," Mark sighed, feeling frustrated. "That's not an answer. I need to know more than that." Kylara looked at him then, her gaze softening just a little. "There are things you don't understand yet. Things I can't explain in words. You are part of something much larger than you know, Mark, and you need to trust me." Trust. That word stung. Mark didn't want to trust her. He didn't want to be caught up in whatever game she was playing. Somehow, as much as he resisted, he knew he didn't have much of a choice. "I don't know how to trust you," Mark said quietly. "I don't even know who you really are. All I know is that I was just doing my job before you came into my life." Kylara's expression softened further, and for the first time since he had met her, Mark saw a flicker of something other than coldness in her eyes. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "I am not your enemy," she said gently. "I am here to protect you." The claim I made. It's more than just a simple declaration. It is a bond. A bond that will keep you safe. Mark looked down at his hands, still trying to make sense of it all. Safe from what? Kylara stood, her voice suddenly hardening. "From those who want to use you against me? From those who will see you as nothing more than a pawn?" Mark's stomach twisted. "You said you would protect me, but why does it feel like I'm the one being controlled?" Kylara's voice softened again, though there was an edge to it. "Because that is the nature of my world. There are forces at play that you do not understand. You're caught in the middle of it, whether you like it or not." Mark stood up, his fists clenched in frustration. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't ask to be part of some ... power struggle." Kylara's eyes narrowed, her posture shifting slightly. "You think I wanted this either? You think I wanted to mark you? To claim you? But it had to be done. My enemies are watching, and they will strike when you least expect it. And when they do, I will be the one to stop them. Mark took a step back, his heart racing. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want to be involved in this. But the more Kylara spoke, the more he realized that there was no easy way out. Kylara turned away, walking to the window and looking out at the planet below. You don't have to understand it now. You will in time. Just know that everything I do to keep you alive. And in the end, that will matter. Mark watched her for a moment, wondering if he could ever trust her. He didn't like the feeling of being controlled, of being caught in someone else's battle. But Kylara was right about one thing. There was no going back. He had already been marked, he had already been claimed, and now he had to figure out how to survive. Mark couldn't sleep that night. The ship was quiet, but his mind was anything but. The conversation with Kylara kept replaying in his head. She had said that she was protecting him, but he still didn't understand why he needed her protection, or what it really meant to be marked by her. He had always prided himself on being independent, on solving problems on his own. But now, it seemed like his world was being controlled by someone else's rules. He sat up in bed, staring out the window at the stars. They looked so far away, so unreachable. The vastness of space felt like it was closing in on him, pressing. Down with the weight of everything he didn't know, the next morning Mark decided he had to do something. He couldn't just keep sitting in his quarters waiting for Kylara to tell him what to do next. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was really happening and why Kylara had involved him in this. He made his way to the bridge, hoping to find some peace away from the mess hall where the crew still avoided him. As he walked through the ship, he noticed that the silence felt even more oppressive than usual. The crew members who did pass by didn't acknowledge him, their faces filled with unease. It was as though they were afraid of him, afraid of Kylara. When Mark reached the bridge, he found Captain Dorian, the leader of the mission, standing near the controls, reviewing the ship's data. Dorian was one of the few crew members who didn't treat him like he was a threat or a symbol of something to be feared. "Mark," Dorian said when he saw him. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that Mark couldn't quite place. "Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to you," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to know more about Kylara, about what's going on. Why is she so ... controlling?" Dorian looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "It's complicated, Mark. Kylara is not like anyone else you've met, or people the Kion live by. Rules that most of us don't fully understand. She's a warrior, protector. And you, unfortunately, have become part of her world now?" Mark clenched his fists. "But why me? Why did she pick me? I'm just a scientist. I didn't ask for any of this." "I don't think she picked you, Mark," Dorian said, his voice softening. "You're part of something bigger than you realize. Kylara didn't make that decision lightly. She's trying to protect you from forces that you don't fully understand." "Protection from what?" Mark asked, his frustration growing. "What do I have to do with her enemies?" Dorian's face darkened. "Kylara's enemies are not just political rivals. They're dangerous. They don't fight fair. They'll target anyone close to her. And right now, you're one of the few people she's attached to. That makes you a target." Mark's stomach dropped. "So I'm a pawn in her game." Dorian shook his head. "No, you're not a pawn. But you are caught in something that's much bigger than you think. Kylara is fiercely loyal to her people. And to her, your safety is her responsibility now. She sees herself as your protector. But I don't want her protection," Mark snapped, his voice rising. "I didn't ask for this. I just want to finish my work and go back home." Dorian sighed and leaned against the console. "I understand. Believe me, I do. But Kylara doesn't see it that way. When she marks someone, it's not just a gesture, it's a bond.
What?
And that bond is something that transcends everything else. For better or worse, you're a part of her world now." Mark stared at the floor, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had always prided himself on being independent, but now it felt like he had no choice. He had been pulled into something he didn't understand, and now there was no way out. "I don't know what to do," Mark admitted, his voice quiet. Dorian gave him a sympathetic look. "You have to trust her. I know it's hard. But Kylara is a force to be reckoned with. If she says she's protecting you, it's because she believes in it. You'll have to follow her lead for now. If you don't, it might put both of you in danger." Mark nodded slowly, though he didn't feel any better. "I still don't understand why she chose me." "Sometimes," Dorian said softly, "you don't get to choose. Sometimes life just puts you in a place where you have no control. You just have to trust that you're where you're meant to be." Mark didn't know what to say to that. He didn't feel like he was meant to be here. He didn't feel like he was meant to be part of Kyla's world. Fighting battles he didn't even understand. He walked away from the bridge in a daze, his mind still spinning with everything he had learned. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the edge of something terrible, something that was coming for him whether he was ready or not. As he made his way back to his quarters, he passed by Kyla's door. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the cold metal. He wanted to talk to her, to finally get some answers. But the thought of facing her again filled him with dread. He wasn't sure if he could handle another conversation like the last. He wasn't sure if he could handle her taking control of his life any longer, but he didn't have a choice. He had to face her. He had to figure out what was really going on. Taking a deep breath, Mark knocked on her door.